go. Alrighty. Okay, we're going to look over the keyboard exercises and the analysis. We did the first one in class. I'm just going to go over it one more time. We're in E minor. We analyze the stuff in E minor. We find it's a 1, 5, 6, 5, our favorite T chord. Back to 1, T-do in the bass. Then one of our favorite Te chords is that 5, 4, 2 of 4, which of course is going to take us to a 4, 6 because it's a 5 of 4, so we're going to a 4 chord, and it becomes first inversion because 4, 2 goes to first inversion. But then we find that this cadence is in the key of G major. We find a 5, 1 here and here in G major. The phrase is definitely ending in the key of G major. So a modulation is taking place in this progression. Again, we did this in class, so I won't spend too much time on it. And then to remind you the steps, identify new key, in this case G major, find the first event in new key, and in this case the first event that is definitely in the key of G but is not in the key of E minor is this D7. That D7 is certainly out of place for the key of E minor. It could happen as a secondary function, but this isn't a secondary function situation because we're coming to a conclusion. We're ending a phrase with a cadence. That's the difference between tonicization and modulation. Ending the phrase, landing on a 1 chord of a new key. This is a modulation. So this D7 then is the first event in the new key. So you find that first event, which in our case here is the D7. And then your last step is to go back 1 chord to find, hopefully, and in the examples in chapter 18, definitely, go back 1 chord to find a common chord, a chord that is in both keys. And so in this case, here's our first event in the new key. The book likes to call it the point of modulation. We go back 1 chord and hopefully we find a common chord. What is that chord? That chord is an A minor over C. Is A minor in the key of G? Yes, it's 2 chord. Is A minor in the key of E minor? Yes, it's a 4 chord. So that then is our pivot chord or common chord. I didn't leave myself a bunch of room here, but we'll make this work. Actually, let's do that one more time. Need to be able to analyze that D. So I'm drawing this bracket, and I'm going to put the key of G major here. And then I'm going to analyze this. Directly underneath that, I'm going to write 2, 6, because that's what A minor is in the key of G. And then following the bracket, once you have this bracket here, when you continue on, just imagine this snaking up here, and now we're in the new key. So I'll analyze now in the key of G major, 5, 7, and 1. Okay, let's do that same thing with the second one. We're in the key of B minor. Starts with, how do I know it's B minor and not D major? Well, nothing happens in the key of D major, for one thing, as I scan the tune. And it begins with a B minor chord. Here's a 5 chord in B minor. Here's a G, which is a deceptive resolution in B minor. So we're going to start in B minor. That makes sense. There isn't anything that happens here that has anything to do with D major. I analyze, I find it's a 1 chord. I find it's a root position 5-7. Then it moves to the major 6 in a deceptive resolution, standard stuff. And then, holy cow, here's a C major chord. Now, C major is not in the key of B minor. So I'm thinking that's going to be our first event in our new key. But we need to determine what that new key is, right? New key. So I look to the end. I look at the cadence. I see an ascending perfect fourth. That looks a whole lot like a sol do. Our new 1 chord is a G chord. Let's check it with this. Yep, there's a D7. We're modulating again to the key of G. So this is, and we can just kind of sketch it in here. This is a 5-7 in the key of G. All right, so we're modulating to G. And we're going to look for the first event in the new key. So we were back here doing our analysis. We found this C major chord, which doesn't make sense in the key of B minor, or at least not yet, he says out of the corner of his mouth. This is a C major chord in B minor. Does that make sense in the new key? Yes. C major is a 4 chord, very common chord. 4 chord in the key of G. So what do? We find the first event in the new key. That's a slash. That event is a C major chord. We go back 1 chord to find the common chord. Whoa, I do not want that. To find the common chord. In this case, when we go back 1 chord from the C major, we find that there's a G major chord, and the chord is a 6 chord in the key of B minor, and it's a 1 chord in the key of G. So I make that bracket, and I always think about the pivot chord, the common chord, and the chord right before it. That's how I make the bracket. I make it big enough to cover the chord before it and the one that we're analyzing, so that I can write the new key right here, G, identify it as a 1 chord, and then again we snake our way back up and we do the rest of the analysis in the key of G, in the new key. So this is a 4-6, this is a 1-6-4, this is a 2-6-5, and then the 5-7-1. So the 6 chord has been used as a pivot chord because the 6 chord, this G major chord, exists in both the keys of B minor and the key of G major. Bonus points. What kind of 6-4 is that? You might say 1-6-4. Oh, it's cadential 6-4. Nope. Cadential 6-4 is part of the last few chords of the phrase and precedes 5. That's passing 6-4. Just for kicks. Alrighty, I hope that's fun. Practice up. Bye.